The stars above Kepler-7 burned cold and patient and absolutely indifferent to the 73 humans still alive on the surface of a planet that had no name in any human language. They'd been calling it Rook ever since the first survey team touched down 8 months ago, and someone said the twin moons looked like chess pieces. That felt like a lifetime ago. Now the base was a ruin of collapsed prefab panels and scorched regolith, and the colony ship Meridian sat dead on the landing pad with 3 of its 4 fuel cells cracked open like eggs, and the Varric had been watching from the ridge for 6 straight days without doing anything at all. That last part was the thing that kept Corporal Frankie Dolan awake. She lay on her bunk in what used to be the medical module, the only structure still fully pressurized, and stared at the ceiling and listened to 40 other people breathe. The bunk above hers had belonged to Dr. Yusra Ose until 5 days ago. Yusra had been the colony's xenobiologist, which had seemed like a wonderful job right up until the Varric landed, and the most important thing you needed to know about them turned out to be not where they came from or what they ate or what their social structures looked like, but simply this. They were patient in a way that felt geological, and they did not appear to want anything except for the humans to leave, and they had no intention of letting the humans have the fuel to do that. Yusra had tried to approach the ridge on day 3 with a translation tablet and a white flag. They hadn't hurt her. They'd simply held her there for 40 minutes, looking at her with those deep compound eyes the color of old amber, and then released her and watched her walk back. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours since. Frankie had known Yusra for 6 years. She'd never seen her frightened before day 3. The pillow Frankie was using had been Yusra's. That was the thing. She'd grabbed it off the bunk without thinking when they'd consolidated the sleeping arrangements, and it was one of those high-density memory foam types. The expensive kind. The kind you'd only bring on a 6-year deep survey mission if you were serious about the small comforts keeping you sane. It fit the shape of Frankie's head in a way her own regulation pillow never had. It was, embarrassingly, the most comfortable she'd slept in 8 months, which was why, on the night of day 6, she noticed what was in it. She'd rolled over at some point past midnight and pressed her face into the foam, and somewhere in the half-space between waking and sleep she felt it. A texture that wasn't physical. A shape pressed into the material that wasn't a shape. More like a frequency. Like the pillow had held someone's head for 6 years and learned the particular weight of their specific kind of thinking, and was now, very gently, playing it back. Frankie sat up. She looked at the pillow for a long time. Then she pressed her palm flat against it, the way you'd press your hand to a speaker to feel the bass, and she closed her eyes. What she felt was not words. It was more like the memory of being interested in something, the particular quality of focus that belonged to someone who had spent years paying close attention to things most people didn't bother to look at. She felt the echo of patience. She felt something that was very close to wonder. She thought, that's Yusra. She thought, Yusra has been thinking about the Varric. She sat up straighter. She pressed her palm harder. What came was fragmented, and she understood that she wasn't actually receiving thoughts. That wasn't how foam worked, how anything worked. But there was something in the accumulated weight of a person, in the specific compression pattern left by years of a particular skull with a particular mind inside it, that carried information if you were paying enough attention. Yusra had been obsessed. Yusra had lain awake on this pillow night after night working the problem, and the problem had left a shape. Frankie sat with it for 2 hours. Then she got up, put her boots on, and went to find Yusra. The xenobiologist was in the corner of the module that had become the informal ops room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, with 4 different tablets arranged in front of her, and the expression of someone who had been arguing with herself for so long that both sides had stopped speaking. "I need to tell you something weird," Frankie said. Yusra looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Join the queue." Frankie sat down across from her and described what had happened. She expected skepticism. Instead, Yusra went very still. "What did it feel like?" she said. "The thing in the pillow. Describe it exactly." "Patience," Frankie said. "Long attention. Something that felt like." She paused. "Like being fascinated by something that other people had written off." Yusra made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She picked up the leftmost tablet and turned it to face Frankie. On the screen was a spectrographic analysis. Atmospheric scan, Frankie recognized, collected by the base's external sensors. There were 6 lines of data, and Yusra had circled the same frequency band in all 6. "They've been broadcasting," Yusra said. "Not to us, not at us, just broadcasting. The same signal, continuous, for 6 days. I almost filed it as background noise on day 1. I almost missed it completely. She tapped the circled band. It's patterned. It's incredibly subtle, but it's patterned, and the pattern is patient, Frankie said. Yusra stared at her. Long attention, Frankie said. The quality of someone paying very close attention to something they find fascinating. The silence between them had a particular texture to it. They're not waiting for us to leave, Yusra said slowly. They're waiting for us to notice. Frankie looked at the tablet. Then she looked at the door of the module, through which, somewhere past 700 meters of dark regolith and a low ridge of volcanic rock, 6 Varric were standing perfectly still and broadcasting something that felt like wonder into a frequency band that humans hadn't thought to call communication. What are they fascinated by? Frankie said. Yusra's mouth did something complicated. I think, she said, they're fascinated by us. Commander Drexler did not take it well. He was a practical man, which was that quality that had gotten him command of the Meridian, and was also the quality that made him terrible at problems that didn't have practical solutions. He stood in the center of the ops room with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and he listened to Yusra's full analysis. 17 minutes, 3 tablets, 1 very frayed xenobiologist. And at the end of it, he said, "So your recommendation is that we transmit back?" "Yes," Yusra said. "In a frequency band we've never used for communication." "Correct. Based on a pattern you identified in an atmospheric scan." "Yes." Drexler looked at Frankie. "And your contribution to this theory was a pillow." "To be fair," Frankie said, "it's a very good pillow." Drexler did not appear to find this funny. He rubbed his face with both hands and made the sound of a man aging in real time. "The Varric haven't made an aggressive move in 6 days," he said. "They haven't communicated anything. They haven't responded to any of our standard hails. We have 22 people with field experience, 3 functional sidearms, and a ship that needs 60 hours of repair work before it can leave the ground. Our margin for error here is approximately 0. "I know," Yusra said. "If you're wrong, I know. If this is a provocation attempt or a lure or something else we don't have a name for yet." "Marcus," Yusra said. The use of his first name stopped him. She hadn't used it since before the landing. "I've been studying the Varric for 8 months," she said. "I've read everything ever transmitted back from the first contact team. I've analyzed 6 days of their signal, and I've matched it against 47 different xenocommunication frameworks. And I am telling you that they are waiting for us to be curious back. That's all. They want to know if we can do the thing they're doing. They want to know if we pay attention." Drexler looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the tablet with the circled frequency band. "If you're right," he said, "what does it get us? Potentially everything. At minimum, a conversation." He looked at Frankie again. Frankie shrugged with one shoulder, the way her mother used to shrug when she'd already made up her mind and was being polite about the pretense of considering alternatives. "Set it up," Drexler said. They spent 4 hours building the transmitter configuration. Frankie ran cable. It was the thing she was best at. The physical, immediate work of making the equipment do what it was supposed to do. The satisfaction of a connection that was either good or wasn't. She'd spent most of her career in logistics and infrastructure, not first contact, and she was aware that the specific work she was doing right now, stripping insulation, checking resistance, rerouting power from the secondary array, was not the kind of thing that would appear in any official account of what was about to happen. She didn't mind. She had never especially needed to appear in official accounts of things. What she minded a little was that Yusra had said the Varric were fascinated by humans, and she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Not because she doubted Yusra's analysis, because she'd spent enough time around genuinely fascinated people to know that fascination was not automatically friendly. Her ex-husband had been fascinated by her, and that had turned out to mean that he'd wanted to understand how she worked, and then reproduce the functionality in a more convenient form. She stripped a section of insulation and thought about the pillow. What she'd felt in it was not clinical. Whatever shape Yusra's months of obsessive thought had pressed into the foam, it had not been the shape of detached scientific interest. It had been the shape of someone who found something beautiful and could not stop looking at it. That was different. She finished the cable run and went back to the ops room and didn't say anything about any of this. They transmitted at 0300 local time. The signal they sent was simple. The same pattern the Varric had been broadcasting reflected back. Not a copy, a response. The way you might repeat someone's question back to them, slightly inflected, to show that you'd heard it and were thinking about it. The 6 Varric on the ridge did not move. For 11 minutes, nothing happened. Then the signal changed. Yusra was at the receiver when it came in, and she made a sound that Frankie had never heard from her before. Not fear, not excitement exactly, but something that lived between them. The sound of a person standing at the edge of something large and vertiginous and choosing deliberately to keep their footing and look. They responded, she said. They modified the pattern. They added a new element. She was already working the analysis. It's a question, or the functional equivalent. It's asking us to. She stopped. What? Frankie said. It's asking us to be more specific. Being specific, it turned out, meant something different to the Varric than it meant in any human communication framework Yusra had studied. It didn't mean provide more data. It meant something closer to, show us what you care about. They worked it out over the course of 4 days, in slow, careful transmissions, with Yusra at the receiver and Frankie often nearby doing other things and occasionally being pulled over to look at something when Yusra needed a second set of eyes. It was the strangest negotiation Frankie had ever witnessed, conducted entirely in an atmospheric frequency band patterned on a spectrographic template between a xenobiologist who hadn't slept properly in 2 weeks and 6 creatures who had crossed an unknown distance of space to stand on a ridge and wait to be noticed. On the morning of the 4th day of transmission, one of the Varric came off the ridge. It walked alone, slowly, across the regolith, directly toward the medical module. It walked the way tidal forces work, with complete certainty and no hurry at all. Drexler ordered everyone to stay inside. He stationed himself at the airlock. Yusra stood next to him with a translation tablet, even though they both knew the tablet was useless. Frankie stood in the back of the room and held Yusra's pillow and felt, for reasons she couldn't explain and didn't try to, that this was the right thing to be doing. The Varric stopped 3 meters from the airlock. It was taller than the initial reports had suggested, nearly 2.5 meters, with a build that was less humanoid than the first contact documents implied. The compound eyes were the color Yusra had described, amber, layered, deep. Its surface, skin was not quite the right word, was a deep iridescent gray-green that shifted in the weak sunlight the way oil on water shifts. It had 4 upper limbs, the inner pair shorter and more dexterous. The outer pair held slightly away from the body in a posture that Yusra had flagged as non-threatening in 3 different xenocommunication frameworks. It looked at the airlock for a moment. Then it produced a sound, not through any visible organ, but from somewhere inside its chest cavity, a complex harmonic that the external sensors caught and translated into the frequency band they'd been using. Yusra read the translation off her tablet. It's asking, she said, which one of us has been. She frowned at the screen. The word it's using doesn't have a direct equivalent. Something like, maintaining the thread of attention. The one who kept the signal continuous. Everyone in the room looked at Yusra. Yusra shook her head. It's not me it's asking about. The signal it's referencing. She checked something, checked it again. The continuous signal started on day 6. Before we began transmitting, from this module, from this location specifically, the room was quiet for 3 seconds. Frankie looked down at the pillow in her hands. Oh, she said. She went out through the airlock alone. Drexler started to object, and she said, Commander, in a voice that borrowed something from her mother, and he stopped. The regolith crunched under her boots. The light on Rook had a quality she'd never found a word for, not thin, exactly, but very clean, the way light looks in the hour after rain. The Varric was 3 meters away, and she was aware of its size in a way that her body registered separately from her mind, the way your body registers the height of a cliff before your brain catches up. She stopped 2 meters away. She held the pillow in both hands, slightly out from her body, the way you'd hold something you wanted someone else to look at. The Varric's amber eyes moved to it, stayed there. She thought about what Yusra had said. Show us what you care about. She thought about the shape she'd felt in the foam, that accumulated pressure of months of careful, loving attention. She thought about the fact that Yusra had brought this specific pillow 6 years across deep space because she had decided, a long time ago, that the small comforts were part of the work. She pressed her palm against the foam. She tried to remember what it had felt like. Not to reproduce it. She didn't have Yusra's specific, obsessive, brilliant, particular kind of attention. She had her own kind, which was quieter and more practical and most often expressed in cable runs and resistance checks, and the specific satisfaction of making something work that wasn't working. But underneath that, there was something else. There was the reason she'd gone into deep survey in the first place, which had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with the fact that she had always, secretly, been unable to stop looking at things. Stars, patterns, the way a signal changes when it passes through a medium, the frequency of a person's particular kind of caring, pressed into foam over 6 years of nights. She looked at the Varek's amber eyes, and she let it see that. The harmonic it produced in response was different from any of the previous signals. Softer, lower, more complex in a way that felt less like information and more like recognition. Yusra's voice in her earpiece barely above a whisper. Frankie, yeah, the translation's not clean. But I think it's saying it recognizes what you're showing it, the quality of it. The Varek reached out with one of its inner limbs. It did not touch the pillow. It held its appendage about 2 centimeters from the foam, close enough that Frankie could see the surface of its skin shifting, the way you can see water move just before a current forms. It held that position for a long time, then it made the sound again. It's asking, Yusra said slowly, working the translation. It's asking how long. How long did it take for you, for a human, to notice the signal it was broadcasting? Frankie thought about it. She thought about the 6 days of nothing, the nights of anxious calculation, the 24-hour strategic sessions that had gotten exactly nowhere. The night she'd grabbed a dead woman's pillow. No, not dead. Yusra wasn't dead, but the pillow of a woman who'd been frightened into sleeplessness by something that turned out to be curiosity, and pressed her face into the foam and stumbled, almost by accident, into the shape of an answer. 6 days, she said, and Yusra translated it into the signal band. The Varek was still. Then it produced a sound that Yusra, after a moment, identified as the structural equivalent of a long, slow exhale. I think that's patience, Yusra said. Sympathetic patience. Like that seems about right, given what you're working with. Frankie laughed. It surprised her. It surprised the Varek. Its outer limbs shifted, a ripple going through the iridescent surface of its skin. It had probably never heard a human laugh before. She watched it catalog the sound, the way Yusra cataloged things, with that total focused attention, filing it somewhere. She held the pillow up slightly. 6 years, she said, and tapped the foam and trusted Yusra to find a translation. It took another 3 days to work out the terms. What the Varek wanted was not complicated. Once the communication framework was established, they wanted access. Specifically, they wanted access to whatever it was that allowed humans to embed something like themselves into a piece of foam by the simple act of sustained, loving attention. They had no word for memory foam. They had no concept of the specific failure mode of human materials, science that had accidentally produced a pillow that could hold the impression of a person's particular quality of consciousness. But they had apparently been looking for something like it, or something like what it implied, for a very long time. What it implied, Yusra worked out over several long conversations with the Varek representative, who had not gone back to the ridge and was now essentially living in front of the airlock, was that human attention, specifically the kind of attention that is rooted in caring rather than analysis, leaves a physical trace. That the trace is detectable if you know what frequency to look for. That the Varek had been detecting faint versions of this trace from several light years away and had come to Rook not to occupy it, but to find the source. They thought it was a natural phenomenon, Yusra said, on the 3rd night of negotiations, sitting cross-legged on her bunk with 5 tablets, and the particular brightness in her eyes that Frankie had learned meant she'd slept for 3 hours and felt fine about it. Some kind of emission from the geology. It took them until we landed to realize it was us. Well, not us specifically. It was me specifically. Apparently, I broadcast significantly higher than baseline. I'm not surprised, Frankie said. Yusra smiled. It was the first real smile Frankie had seen from her in 2 weeks. The thing is, she said, they've been trying to develop this capacity themselves, for generations. They call it, she checked her tablet, something that translates roughly as the weight that persists. The ability to leave a lasting impression of your attention in the physical world. They can't do it. Their consciousness works differently. They're extraordinary analysts. They can detect the traces humans leave, in foam, in rock, in the way a room feels after someone has spent years working in it with genuine care. But they cannot produce it themselves. Frankie sat with this. They crossed however many light years, she said, to find out how we do it. Yes, and the answer is that we don't do it deliberately. It just happens when we pay attention to things we actually care about. Yes, And you want to tell them that. Yusra's smile did something complicated. I want to tell them that. And I want to study it with them. And I want. She stopped. What? I want to give them the pillow. Frankie looked at her. It's mine, Yusra said. I know. But what I pressed into it, 6 years of paying close attention to exactly the thing they've come all this way to understand, that seems like it should belong to the conversation more than it belongs to me. Frankie looked at the pillow. She thought about the night she'd grabbed it off the bunk. The shape of Yusra's attention pressed into the foam, which was what had started all of this. She thought about how close they'd come to never noticing, about 6 days of doing nothing because they didn't know what was being offered. Okay, she said. But for the record, you're getting a new pillow. A good one. I'll put in the supply request myself. Yusra laughed. Then she picked up her tablet and went back to work. The handover happened at dawn. All 73 of them were outside for it, which Drexler had not officially sanctioned, but also had not officially prevented. The son of Kepler-7 was coming up behind the ridge, and the 5 Varric still on the ridge were outlined in it, still and enormous and amber-eyed, and the 6th was standing 3 meters from Yusra, who was holding the pillow in both hands. She said something in the signal band that the external speakers translated as a formal address. Frankie didn't catch all of it. Something about the nature of attention. Something about how the trace that persisted was not a record of brilliance, but of caring, which were different things, and how caring was not a technology humans had developed, but a failure mode they'd stumbled into, and how sometimes the best things were like that. The Varric reached out with its inner limbs. Yusra placed the pillow in them. The Varric held it for a long moment. Its amber eyes were very still. Then it pressed one appendage flat against the foam, the same gesture Frankie had made 6 nights ago in the dark medical module, and it went still in a way that was different from its previous stillness. More internal, like a frequency had changed somewhere. It stayed that way for 3 minutes. When it moved again, the harmonic it produced was very quiet. Yusra's face did something that Frankie couldn't name. She listened to the translation, and then she turned to face the assembled colony, and what she said was, "It says it can feel her. It says it can feel what she was thinking about." Nobody said anything. It says, Yusra's voice was steady with some effort. It says it feels like standing on a ridge and watching something that never stops being interesting. Frankie looked up at the ridge and the 5 Varric outlined in the light of Kepler-7 and thought about how they'd been standing there for 6 days doing exactly that. She thought about how different the same action looks, depending on whether you know what it means. She thought about how many things in her life that probably applied to. They got the Meridian repaired in 40 hours. The Varric sent 3 of their number with Yusra for the repair sessions, not to help, exactly, but to observe, with that total attention, amber-eyed focus that had stopped feeling threatening and started feeling like being seen. One of them watched Frankie run cable for 4 straight hours, and she was aware the entire time that it was building a detailed model of what she was doing and why, and she found, to her mild surprise, that she didn't mind. She minded, a little, that the model was probably more accurate than her own. On the last night before departure, Drexler authorized a fire outside the medical module. Not for warmth. Rook's nights were cold, but they had suits. But because someone had found a canister of accelerant, and someone else had found a collection of dry botanical samples they'd been growing in the greenhouse before the Varric arrived, and Drexler had looked at both things and made a practical decision about morale. The Varric representative sat at the edge of the firelight. It did not appear to register the warmth, but it watched the fire with the same quality of attention it had given everything else. And when the light shifted and jumped, it shifted with it. And Frankie thought, it's learning the frequency of this too. This and everything we do. It's filing it somewhere, in whatever serves them as memory. She wondered what shape she would leave in it, if she could. She thought probably the shape would look like cable runs, like resistance checks, like the particular focus of someone solving the immediate problem in front of them and trusting that the larger thing would hold. She thought that was probably fine. Yusra was sitting near the fire with 2 of the tablets and a cup of something hot. And she had the look she got when she was thinking about something so interesting that she'd forgotten to be tired. And Frankie sat down next to her and didn't say anything, and they watched the fire together for a while. When we write this up, Yusra said, without looking up from her tablet, the official report is going to say that first contact was established through a systematic analysis of their communication signals. Yes, Frankie said. "It's not going to mention the pillow." "Probably not." Yusra was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to mention the pillow." Frankie looked at the fire. The Varric at the edge of the light was watching them with its amber eyes, and she couldn't tell if it was paying attention to their words, or to the quality of them, or to something else entirely, some frequency she didn't have the equipment to detect. "For the record," she said, "it was a very good pillow." Yusra's shoulders shook. The sound she made was quiet and real, and it went out into the dark rook night, and whatever it was worth, in the economy of the universe, Frankie figured it was worth something. In the official Meridian Contact Report, filed 14 months later with the Kepler Survey Authority, the discovery of the Varric communication methodology was attributed to Dr. Yusra Osi's pioneering analysis of atmospheric frequency patterns. The report ran to 240 pages. It included 17 appendices, 6 signal transcripts, 4 xenocommunication framework analyses, and a full technical breakdown of the transmitter modification that enabled initial response contact. On page 94, in a section about the specific conditions that had led Dr. Ose to identify the relevant frequency band, there was a single paragraph about a memory foam pillow. The paragraph noted that the pillow had been manufactured on Earth, that it had been in continuous personal use for approximately 6 years before the events on Rook, and that its material properties, specifically the compression pattern left by years of consistent contact with a single individual's focused attention, had provided a tactile analog to the Varric signal frequency that proved instrumental in initial pattern recognition. It was technically accurate. It did not mention that the pillow had been grabbed off a dead woman's bunk. Not dead. Yusra was not dead, but that was how it had felt in the worst days. By a logistics corporal who was good with cable and bad at sleeping, and who had pressed her palm flat against the foam in the dark and felt, without knowing what she was feeling, the shape of someone else's years of loving attention. It did not mention that the Varric, upon receiving the pillow, had held it for 3 minutes and then said something that translated to standing on a ridge, watching something that never stopped being interesting. It did not mention that Frankie Dolan had looked at that ridge in the early light of Kepler-7 and understood, in the way you understand things that you already knew but hadn't gotten around to naming yet, that the Varric had not come to Rook to conquer anything. They had come because something in this corner of space had been broadcasting for years, the frequency of someone paying close attention to things they cared about, and they had wanted, more than anything, to find out what it felt like to be near it. They had crossed the dark for the same reason anyone ever crosses anything. They just wanted to be close to something that was paying attention. Frankie thought about that for most of the 14-month journey home. She thought about her ex-husband and the specific quality of his attention, which had been analytical and precise, and which she had mistaken for several years for the real thing. She thought about the feel of the foam in the dark and the shape of Yusra's particular way of caring, pressed into it night after night until it had become a kind of record. She thought about what she left behind in the things she touched, whether it was anything worth crossing light years for. She didn't have an answer, but she thought about it. On the last night of the journey, she put in the supply request she'd promised. 1 memory foam pillow, high density, the expensive kind, notes field, personal, for Dr. Yosi. 6 years was a long time, and some things should persist. The supply officer flagged it as a non-essential luxury item. Frankie approved it anyway.